Welcome to the second part of our PKO webinar. Today we will have a look at some preflop stuff, mostly how we adjust the bigger stack or the shorter stack, and then specifically we'll be looking at the blind v blind situations, and I'll show you a few examples, so it's going to be a bit more entertaining this time. Let's go to the second slide. So preflop adjustments. In PKOs, we encounter many jumps with capped ranges. This is one of the main differences from vanilla tournaments. Keep an eye on these spots to adjust properly. That doesn't mean the ranges are always capped, are weak. Sometimes they're strong, but they lack the top range. For example, if you see someone jump like 16 big blinds from UTG, this doesn't mean he's weak. He just doesn't have aces kings most of the time. And knowing this helps you build a counter strategy. So it's important to keep an eye. Then we should open raise bigger when we are 30 blinds effective plus, because if we are the big stack, we raise 2.3x, so we can reduce the SPR and get the bounties easier post flop. But if we are the short stack, we want to give villains a higher price for going after our bounty. Basically, we don't want to allow them to have a super wide range when they go. I usually look at the big blind stack and build a strategy around it. From the cutoff and button, it makes sense to have even bigger raise first in size, especially if you cover. And it helps that there are less ranges behind you who can wake up with a real hand. So for 30 big blinds effective, if I'm the bigger stack in the cutoff, I raise 2.5x also on the button. For 40 to 100 bigs on the button, the optimal size is 2.8 or 2.75x. So I have done some research to figure out the optimal preflop sizes, and I just shared them with you. The bigger our raise first in sizes, the tighter range we should play in theory. However, we play against people, so they usually have a hard time adjusting to some bigger raises because they don't usually play against someone who opens from the button 2.8x. And I suspect people in general they overfold and under 3-bet bluff when you make it bigger. So we should keep that in mind. Mostly keep in mind that you should be overfolding versus 3-bets when you raise bigger, because people will be very honest with their 3-bets. And we can get away with playing pretty wide ranges as well. This is what happens with the Brazilians. I'm sure you've noticed. They have been killing it lately, and one of the reasons is they use these bigger sizes and nobody adjusts properly. Next, as a short stack, once we are under 25 bigs, we are forced to play really tight from every position, and then we start limping. This is very important part of the PKO concepts. When you're short and basically cover no one, if you just raise, people behind you, they can 3-bet to a super big sizing. Let's say you make it 2 big blinds, the button makes it 9, effectively putting you all in. And this makes you want to play really tight ranges. And this is not ideal. So our counter adjustment to that is to basically start limping. We rarely limp our entire range. It's mostly a mix between raise and limp. But by limping, we can build a strategy around limp calling, limp jamming some hands, and it helps us play a wider range. Okay, and also raising bigger than min raise is too expensive when you have 25 big blinds or less. So we stick to min raising or limping. And of course, in the later positions, we can limp more. It works the same way as the raise first in. When there are less ranges behind you, you play more hands. Okay, we'll go to the next part. When we get in the deeper stages of the MTT, we slowly reduce the sizes towards more vanilla-like sizes, which is usually a min raise, because there is some ICM in play already and the chips become more valuable. plus the ranges become tighter overall. This is pretty self-explanatory. We need to start flattening raises. This is very important actually, especially mean raises with a ridiculously wide range if we cover. I'll show you a few examples later. I'm sure you'll be surprised. It always surprises me even after seeing a lot of those ranges. It helps to flat even wider range if we cover most of the players left to act, not just the guy who is raising. And it's almost impossible to overdo this by calling too much. Sometimes the solver wants to play almost every suited hand from the small blind, for example, versus cutoff. So as I said, it's super difficult to overdo it. So most suited connectors and suited one high cards hands, along with most pocket pairs and some gappers, we usually play. We'll look deeper into this. We should squeeze both no-win and no-win more often, especially when we cover. There is a lot of room for exploits here because population tends to be really capped when flatting raises, and when overcalling raises, they usually fast play their strong hands when they cover you, and when they call, it's pretty much always a hand that wants to fold to a squeeze. So I'm sure you have noticed these guys from Montenegro, along with Brazilians, they punish hard these calls and overcalls in bounties, and it's basically a printing strategy. So it's no surprise we play against people, and people don't always balance their ranges well. Okay, we get to the next point. When we are the shorter stack, in theory, we shouldn't 3-bet no-win anything with under 40 big blinds if we have a reasonable bounty power, which is over 1. If we have over 1 bounty power and under 40 big blinds, it's like a rule of thumb. We should never 3-bet no-win, both in position and out of position. However, there is room for exploits here. I've seen a lot of different adjustments people make. And if we do happen to 3-bet, since we are the shorter stack, we want to make the price higher for the guy who covers us. So we want to make sure we use a very big size when we 3-bet, because villain has very good pot odds with, especially with the suited portion of his range, to call and go after our bounty, and we don't want to basically give him this present. And if the bounty power is smaller on us and he covers us, then we slowly move towards a vanilla-like strategy. We don't use these big sizes anymore. Also, in the deep stages, like final 5 or 10% left, we also play closer to vanilla strategy. And after some adjustments, appears that squeezing to 1/3 of your stack with 30 to 40 big blinds, especially out of position, is a very good exploit, I would say, because people adapt to it the same way they adapt if you squeeze jam. If you have like 35 bigs from the small blind versus cutoff and button, if you make it 11.5 big blinds, the cutoff is essentially going to play the same range he plays against the jam when he covers you. But the thing is, if you use this 1/3 of your stack strategy, then you are also allowed to have some squeeze folds, like usually it's the offsuit aces, like ace-7, ace-8, ace-9 off, depends on the positions, but these are usually the bluffs we want to have when we are covered and we have enough fold equity. And I suspect some people might be calling a little bit wider if you jump 35 bigs compared to if you make it like 11.5 bigs. They might think you have aces and kings only and fold, which really boosts your EV of the bluffs. So I would recommend to start using this. And then we get to the last point. The next logical trick is to 3-bet smaller, especially in position if you're the bigger stack. This is very important also because if you think about it, if someone is opening from 22 big blind stack and has significant bounty power, any hand you 3-bet, you're basically going to be pot committed because of the bounty factor. So to make sure you also have some bluffs, you need to be using a smaller size, and also the smaller size makes you isolate yourself versus this player. And you want to make sure he has a low price so he can join the pot, and this way you reduce the SPR. You play heads up pot against the guy you cover, and you play against the capped range usually, because guys when they defend 3-bet as the shorter stack, they have pretty face up range. They usually don't have the top range, so this is very important to implement as a strategy. I usually stick to 2.5x sizing in position up to 40 big blinds effective, 2.75 from 40 to 60 big blinds, and then 3x over 60 big blinds when the bounty power is relevant and I cover villain. Okay, now we get to the more interesting part of the webinar, which is the pre-flop examples. So this time I decided to actually use Preflop Academy website, and I'm going to show you in real time how you can also benefit from it. 1 second. Okay, so here we are. So I went to tournaments, and then we have several hands which are prepared for my webinar today. And the first one I'll be looking at is this hand. It's from my own hand history. It's basically Bounty Builder 530 on stars. The blinds currently are 501,000. The starting stack is 25K. And this guy in the cutoff, we'll be focusing on him today. He has 21,000 chips and he has 1.5 starting bounties. So you can imagine that if he has less than a starting stack and he has 1.5 starting bounties, his bounty power is quite significant. Let's calculate it together. So 21K, we divide by 25K. This is the percentage he has of the starting stack. And then he has 1.5 starting bounties. So basically, we can do this. We divide the starting bounties by the amount of starting stacks. This player has just under 1.8 bounty power, which is very significant. So usually this results for one bounty power, there is usually about 5% equity drop when we close the action. So this is just under 10% equity drop. So if we imagine this guy open jumps and we're in the big blind, we will have to call his jam with about 8 or 9% less equity than GPV. So this is quite significant. So I'm going to show you his strategy first with limps enabled. So it's very important that we allow this cutoff player to be allowed to limp, because we can see the difference in his range overall. So if he's allowed to limp, he's playing about 28-29% range, and it's basically almost even split between open limp and open min raise. So that's quite nice range to play from the cutoff when you're covered by everyone and you have a significant bounty power in a bounty tournament. But in this example, I'm actually allowed from the cutoff to ISO his raise to only 3.5x. So this is a sizing which some people might be using in game. If they face a limp from the big blind, they might be ISOing to 3.5x, but I think it's a little bit too small size, and this is why the cutoff player actually is playing such a wide range. Let's see what happens if I'm allowed to isolate bigger size. So in this example, I wait a second. Yeah, this is supposed to be an example where villain is facing a bigger ISO size. I'm not sure why it isn't shown here as 4.5x, but the other day I looked at it, it was 4.5 big blinds. Anyway, so right now he wants to start. Wait a second. to see if I'm looking at the right example. Versus jump. Okay, so let's have a look at this. This is the strategy for cutoff if he isn't allowed to limp. So he's only playing about 25% range here. And it's a very linear range. And this is my counter strategy from the big blind. The first thing we notice here is since villain's bounty power is so big, so significant, and we have a lot of chips, we basically defend any two versus a min raise. This is very important. And then the second important stuff is we don't slow play anything. Like when we're the bigger stack, we just want to make sure we I have a question about the bounty power in the chat. I'm going to explain it quickly once again. Sorry about that, guys. So bounty power is the term we use to determine whether someone's bounty is worth going after. It's basically a formula between the number of starting bounties and the number of starting stacks somebody has. So in this example, as I mentioned, this guy has 1.5 starting bounties and he has just under one starting stack. So if he had exactly one starting stack, then we divide 1.5 divided by 1, and his bounty power would be 1.5. But in this example, because he has a little bit under a starting stack, then his bounty power goes up, and it's more worth it to go after his bounty. Let's put it that way. I hope that explains it well. So yeah, what we can learn from this is basically how wide we are allowed to go after this player's min raise post flop. So we play any two, and we also 3-bet jump because it's only 21 blinds effective. We 3-bet jump the whole value part of our range. And here, last but not least, I have played around by node locking the cutoff all-in raise first in range, because I think this player, I play with him a lot, and I think I know the way he plays pretty well. So I determined that if he open jumps here, he's basically going to have pretty much this range. It consists of hands which are strong enough to open jump, but people usually don't feel comfortable enough to raise call their all-in with such hands. So I suspect he's going to have a hand which is along these ones, and maybe a few suited aces. I wasn't sure about this, but it wouldn't change the whole picture. So if he open jumps and he has 1.8 bounty power, this is the range we play against the jump. So what I mentioned earlier, it's very important to make sure you know when you're up against the capped range, and to be able to form a counter strategy. And this is our counter strategy in this case, in this example. And we can see the EV of calling deuces here is 1.48, which is quite high. The EV for king 7 off, even king 7 off here is profitable, which is surprising at first glance. And you can see any ace we play, even a hand like queen 5 suited, any suited king. So make sure you know where you're playing up against and the way he builds his range. Okay, so let's have a look at another example. This one is a little bit more extreme. It's a PKO example where the UTG player is the chip leader at the table, and then the big blind is the shortest stack at the table with average stack 28 big blinds in this example. You can see on Preflop Academy, there is the bounty power shown here. So the big blind has just over 4 bounty power. Let me open this once again so I can show you also a comparison between GPV and vanilla ranges in this example. This is going to be very useful. So first of all, let's have a look at the raise first in from EP. This is the GPV range EP plays here in a vanilla tournament, which doesn't have bounties. So about 16-17% range in total. What about here when the situation is so extreme that the big blind is the shortest stack and we cover the whole table? well, our range goes almost double, from 16 point something to 29.2. And this is insane because if you think about it, it's from UTG. There are 7 live ranges behind us, but in the same time, we have a lot of benefit to play a wide range against these players, because some of them have very significant bounty powers. Like even MP has over 2 bounty power. The low jack has 1.4 pretty much, which is also pretty good. So this is the first thing we should notice. And then let's have a look at the response versus this white raise first ins in both examples, in vanilla and in bounty. So versus raise first in, let's say we are in the hijack. We have 42 big blinds. Okay, so this is the range from UTG, and this is the PKO response from the hijack. The first thing we should notice here is that there is literally 0 3 betting. This is very important because the hijack, he realizes what's going on, that the UTG is going to be playing a very wide range here. And also the hijack covers the remaining players behind him. So he wants to basically only flat and allow the players behind him overcall or even 3-bet jam or something, and also to make sure the big blind joins the pot by calling or jamming. This is very important for the hijack because this way he maximizes the EV for going after the players' bounties. What about a vanilla situation? The same one. So first of all, as we already know, the first range here is much tighter, but also the response is much tighter, and there are 3 betting. There are some 3 bets. So we see a few key differences between these 2 examples. And as I said earlier, it's very difficult to overdo these calls. Like even from the hijack versus UTG, you have to be calling King 5 suited, 8-6 suited, 9-7 suited, any pocket pair, even a hand like Ace 9 off. All of these are very unintuitive, and this is the reason that bounties are so profitable to play nowadays, because people they do a lot of mistakes. I'm sure nobody plays like this. Even some of the best PKO players out there, they don't play the exact GTO strategy. So there is a lot of room to exploit. For example, what in a real life situation, the hijack here would have some 3 bets with the top range, and his flatting range would be super weak. So as I mentioned earlier, these no-win squeezes or even all-in squeezes would be very profitable in the small blind shoes, in the button shoes, against humans. Let's look at the next example. Yeah, let's first see what does the big blind defend versus the vanilla and the bounty ranges from UTG. So this is the response from the big blind in the GPV vanilla scenario. He folds like 10% and he only jumps about 8. What about here? We see significant raise in his defense. He pretty much plays any 2 at this point, and also he 3-bet jumps more hands now, which is kind of natural when you play against a wider range and the price is minimal. In this example, it's a min raise from UTG. Then you want to be defending much wider. But also what's a little bit shocking to me here at first glance is what does the big blind play if we have a scenario where UTG opens and the hijack just flats. So in this example, versus 2 players, the big blind plays almost any 2, which is a bit insane. Because if we see here, so multi-way, big blind versus hijack. Yep, this one. Here we also see a big difference in the big blind's range. He doesn't want to play the worst hands, the trash hands, basically. Where does the difference come from? It's basically the same scenario for the big blind. He's still the shortest stack. He's still playing out of position versus 2 ranges. Well, the first difference is because he's going to realize better his equity. First of all, because he's facing wider ranges, his trash hands are going to have higher equity. And also when he hits something, it's going to get paid much better because he doesn't have fold equity. So when he defends, he only has 4 big blinds behind. There's going to be over 6 in the pot, close to 7. So he can just basically fast play any strong hand he flops, like even a mid pair with 6 deuce off. It's gonna get paid by ace high, king high, maybe even weaker. So he doesn't have any fold equity, which helps him. And also the big blind, when he's so short in a bounty tournament, he kind of wants to take the close spots because by winning, getting a double up in a close spot, he actually has added benefits for a future game because then he's going to be covering some players at the table. So this is really a game changer for the big blind in a bounty scenario. And let's see what happens if we have 2 overcalls. So UTG raises, hijack calls, then the button calls. What happens to the big blind range? It's basically the same, a little bit more folding because when you play against 3 players in position, really you can't make the entry off profitable at this point. So that's we want to make sure we still have some folds. But what happens in a vanilla scenario when we face 3 ranges in front of us? So let's see if it's the right example. I'm going to refresh it quickly. Multi-way, hero position the big blind. Okay, so this is the right range. You can see there are a lot of folds here. And also something else which is curious is how wide is actually the big blind supposed to be squeeze jamming here. He faces a raise and 2 covers, and then he's jamming a hand like 7-6 suited, 9-7 suited, king 6 suited, almost any ace, which is very counterintuitive. And the reason for it is because when he jumps here, the UTG guy is pretty much always playing. He's literally always playing, and most of the times he's ISO jamming. And what happens is we have a min raise, we have 2 calls, so this is extra 4 big blinds. And when the big blind jumps, he actually has only 5 big blinds behind, but he plays for a pot of almost 20. He's effectively getting tripled up by playing against one range, which is very nice. And this is the reason we see it's a profitable jam even with 9-7 suited. I think this is another spot where the population makes major mistakes. They don't recognize the spot as being so good for such light jams. For example, I don't remember the last time I saw anyone jam a hand like Jack 10 off or 7-6 suited in that spot. So there is a lot of room to exploit. Okay, so what are we going to discuss next? Okay, so we'll see how does hijack play versus low jack. Actually, the low jack in this example has 1.4 bounty power pretty much, but he only has 18 big blinds. And still the big blind is the shortest stack in play, and the hijack, he covers the remaining players. So in this PKO example, we see that the hijack here plays, was that about 30% range overall, and he's mostly calling still. He basically has just a few hands that like to 3-bet jam. And remember, he's 3-bet jamming. He's not 3-betting to any smaller size here because this bounty power is so significant that the hijack literally cannot have any 3-bet folds, and therefore he just wants to maximize the EV of his strong hands and just jam, because then the low jack is going to be forced to raise call kind of wide range. But what happens in the same scenario if it's a regular tournament? So let's see. Okay, the hijack is only playing 12% here compared to 30%. You can see that these are major shifts in the ranges, and most people nowadays, they kind of autopilot. They play too many tables to keep attention to all this, and it's very important to stay focused, or to at least make sure you have a very solid PKO game, and then start multi-tabling, because the optimal game nowadays is very different from what we actually see from the players. Okay, now we're going to have a look at how the button and small blind respond versus the low jack. This is also very interesting. I mentioned that the less ranges there are to act left behind you, the more wider you can, the more wide range you can play, especially in position. So let's have a look what the button flats versus low jack here. Okay, so the button is playing almost 40% range in this example, compared to about 16. So this is more than double the range of the button. He has so many reasons to play a wide range here. He has just 2 ranges behind him, and he doesn't mind the big blind to join at any point by any play. So he plays almost 40%. Because he has 32 big blinds stuck, he has some jumps, but the majority of his VPIP range, he still flats. And then what about the small blind? Well, the small blind, there is a big difference between the button and the small blind. They look like similar stacks, but what matters here is small blind doesn't have position. So he kind of needs to play a little bit more aggressive, the strong part of his range, which is pretty much every pair, and a big part of his strongest aces, both suited and offsuit. But look at the flats with the suited portion of the range. He's literally calling any 2 suited in this example, because it's just a min raise and the big blind is very short. The bounty powers of these 2 players are very significant. And what would happen if we looked at the vanilla scenario? So here he plays under 24%, and it's basically a split between call and jam. And you can see it has nothing to do with this range, basically, which once again is something that the majority of the players nowadays online, they're not even playing close to this strategy. So very important to note. And then last but not least, let's look at the button overcall versus UTG and the hijack. Okay, so hero position is in the button. We have a raise from UTG. We have a call from the hijack, which doesn't have 3 betting range. And this is the response from the button. In this example, he's overcalling aces and kings here versus 2 players in position when he doesn't cover either of these players. Let's see. We have a question here. What's the button call range? Post big blind jump and low jack call or jump. So basically the button, let's go to this example. So the button flats versus low jack. 1 second, I need to refresh it. Sometimes it gets mixed up between PKO and vanilla, because I'm using in the same time the 2 solvers. So versus raise first in from the low jack, the button plays this range. So you can see that the majority of it is suited, and the reason for it is because when the big blind jumps and the low jack ISO jumps, the button actually wants to play pretty much the entire range he flats. There are very few exceptions, and usually he only folds hands that perform really well, really bad in multi-way scenarios when it comes to all-in, and these hands are usually the worst offsuit hands of our range. So in this example, he would be folding just a few of these bottom offsuit aces. He would be folding these offsuit nines. I don't think he's folding anything suited, and that's it. And yeah, this is the strategy that the button is supposed to be playing here. What's next? So yeah, very unintuitive. Can we see big blind response post low jack ISO jam? You mean can we see button response? I'm guessing. I don't think that's possible. If it's possible, maybe Pavel can show me how to do it, but I tried to find it. I couldn't find it. Basically, the scenario is low jack opens, button flats, big blind jams, low jack jams. Can we see the button response? Pavel said that I can use compare ranges with this icon, but I'm not really familiar with this. But I have solved such scenarios, and the button basically flats such a wide range to only fold the bottom offsuit hands. That's it. I think in real scenario versus humans, it's okay to play these wide suited hands, but I think the low jack in this example in the solver, he's going to be probably playing tighter than this because he's covered by everyone except the big blind. So this in combination with probably the low jack not ISO jamming enough versus the big blind in real games, I think it would make the button want to go slightly tighter, mostly in the offsuit region. I think it's fine to basically be overcalling ace 8 off plus, king 10 off, queen 10 off, jack 10 off, I'm not so sure. And then the suited portion, it gets unaffected by the tighter response from the low jack. This is very important to note. We don't really care how tight villain is because the suited hands, they just perform very well. So if you suspect someone is a little bit tighter than he's supposed to be, then you just start folding more offsuit hands. That's it. Let's see, a call for bet. So it's not a call for bet basically because we don't have a 3-bet here. It's yeah, it's a bit more complicated. I'll see if I can prepare this for the next time, but for this time I'm not aware how to do it. I'm still new to this Poker Academy software, but it's very nice. So far I was able to find some very nice stuff on it. Okay, we were looking at the overcall range from the button versus EP and hijack. So in a PKO scenario, this is only possible in a PKO scenario. You see aces and kings and queens half of the time getting overcalled here in the button. This is something that I think literally nobody does online nowadays. It's something super unintuitive, and this is the reason why squeeze jamming in the small blind shoes versus race and 2 calls would be so profitable, because nobody ever overcalls kings or aces or queens in the button shoes versus UTG and hijack. So yeah, keep in mind that. And also as a quick comparison to vanilla scenario, the same scenario for vanilla, what is supposed the button to be doing here? So this is the example, multi-way button versus UTG and hijack. You can see even in GPV, it's wait a second. Okay, now it's good. Even in GPV, the button is supposed to overcall aces here. I've never seen this one. So yeah, this is another reason. Also in vanilla, the ranges are so capped for calling and overcalling that the squeezes are like the best counter strategy. Okay, so we get to the next point, which is exploring in position versus out of position traps versus cutoff. Okay, so we get back to the this example. So the cutoff raises here, And we see how the strategy changes for the guy in position who covers him compared to the guy out of position who covers him. So in this example, the cutoff bounty power is still pretty significant. It's about 1.1. So this is his raise first in. From the cutoff, he has a few jumps, but let's focus on the raising part of his range. He's playing about 40% range because of the big blind in this example, and this is how the bottom plays in position. First of all, he plays about 36-37% overall. The majority of this range is by calling, and we see similar pattern. He wants to call a lot of suited hands, and he has a lot of slow plays because of the big blind. Basically, he's always calling 10s plus, and the majority of the best suited aces. What about the small blind? How would the small blind play versus the cutoff only? Let's see. Okay, first of all, we see the huge difference in the suited portion of the range. He just plays so many suited hands. I think it's super difficult to overdo it, actually. And then what we see next is how much less slow plays he has. He basically only slow plays aces and kings from the strong hands, and here and there some suited king, queen, king, jack, queen, jack, but those are not the typical slow plays you see. And then he makes sure he fast plays the top of his range when it comes to non-paired hands, and pretty much any pair under kings he just jumps here. And I wanted to illustrate the difference between in position and out of position slow playing ranges when we cover. So yeah, as Gio pointed out, only 40% fold from the small blind here is quite insane, I would say. It's super difficult to get there. I've seen some players try to extend their suited calls here in the small blind. Some of them might be flatting queen 4 suited, some of them might be calling 10-6 suited, but to call 10 deuce suited, jack deuce suited, and 5 deuce suited, you don't see that every day. And everybody forgets to expand the offsuit portion of their range. There are some people who might fold ace here in the small blind. And you can see it's, first of all, we don't fold any aces, and second of all, we mostly play them aggressively by 3-bet jamming. So for a few years at least, this bounty format is going to be super exploitable. The edges are going to be very big for the players that found the time and put enough work into bounties. So I think we can benefit greatly by improving in this format. And going back to the presentation, we have the next part. I won't have time to finish this one, but it's going to be left for the part 3 of the webinar. So basically, what comes next is the blind v blind battles, as I like to call them. We have a lot of unintuitive stuff here. I can start now by introducing some of the adjustments we make when we are covered in bounties. And I don't think we'll have time for the examples now, but maybe we can start with that next time. So first of all, when we are the shorter stack blind v blind, we want to open fold more from the small blind and avoid raising no-no-win. What's the reason for it? Because if we have significant bounty power and we raise no-no-win, let's say we make it 3.5x with 30 big blinds, then the big blind has a lot of incentive to just play back at us to go after our bounty, mostly by defending a very wide range. And as we all know, there is a big disadvantage for playing out of position in general in poker. So we want to avoid playing out of position versus someone who has incentive to play big pots versus us, and versus someone who is going to put us all in pretty often post flop. So we either want to open jam if the stacks allow it, if the bounty power is significant, or just limp and make sure to open fold more. What's the best exploit versus someone who is isolating too much bluffs? well, it's a bit unintuitive, but it's not by limp raising more. It's actually by open folding more. So there is these guys from Montenegro who some of them isolate like 73% blind v blind, and they even though they raise fold a lot versus limp raises, the best counter exploit is to actually open fold a lot. So sometimes we need to be making sure we fold very, very much, like maybe 45% sometimes if we have a very high bounty power. All of this goes towards up to 40 big blinds effective, basically. The second point is the higher our bounty power is, the less often we want to limp fold versus ISO jumps and ISO raises. For 15 to 25 to 20 big blinds, we open fold so much that we rarely limp fold. So this is kind of connected to the first point. Then we get to the next one. Our open jam range, when covered, is super linear without the top range. So for cheap EV, it mixes in some hands like 8-7 suited, Queen 7 suited, maybe some Jack 10 off. We've seen for like 18 big blinds. But if we have a significant bounty power in a bounty tournament and we're the shorter stack in the small blind, we want to make sure we have a lot of aces when we open jam. I mean ace X and king X, basically the high cards along with some pairs, and we don't make profit by jamming 8-7 suited, Queen 6 suited types of hands anymore. So very important to keep that in mind. And we get to the last point for today. If you suspect the big blind is on the passive side, he doesn't isolate enough, he doesn't iso jam enough, you can start no-win raising more of your top range instead of limping. This is basically an exploit because this way we exploit his passivity, basically his passiveness. Also, you can open limp more weaker hands because he won't isolate so much, especially for 25 big blinds plus. Okay, I'm guessing that now is the time to start with the questions. So you can post in the Discord chat and I'll be answering. And for the next time, we will start with the blind v blinds examples when we are covered. Then we'll cover the blind v blind when we are the bigger stack, and we'll see some examples, and I'll make sure to include some post flop stuff for the next time, as there are a lot of adjustments to make for the post flop as well. So, yep. I'll mostly be reading the Discord chat, but I'll also keep an eye on the Zoom chat in case anybody wants to ask a question there. Today we had a little bit less theory and more examples, so I have noticed that usually the more questions they show up when there is more theory involved, but still, let's see if there is something I can be of help with. Actually, something I wanted to mention, but I always keep forgetting. What's the best way to become a very good player in bounties? I wanted to share this in the first webinar, but I forgot. It's basically by making sure you realize how a hand performs versus a range. And the best way to do that is to grind a lot of examples where you can even take like the poker strategy Equilab too. There are a lot of free tools on the market like Poker Stove, for example, where you can explore a hand like, for example, Queen 4 suited. How does it perform versus a capped range? Let's say the button open jumps 20 big blinds and you close the action in the big blind, you cover him. How does a hand like Queen 4 suited perform? And by grinding a lot of these situations, you get better in determining hand versus range scenarios in game. And the next upgrade to this would be to grind scenarios where you try to figure out how a hand performs versus multiple ranges. So if you put enough hours into this should be very helpful, as a lot of the stuff isn't so intuitive when it comes to bounties. So yeah, I get this question a lot. How do I improve the most in bounties? And this is the answer. And also you can explore a lot of these scenarios in PKOs. Like they have a lot of stuff uploaded on Preflop Academy website for 6 max, 7 max, and 8 max. And you can just figure out where the population deviates from what's optimal. And as there are a lot of spots like this, I promise you, there are a lot of spots where population doesn't play as they should be. And yeah, we can just dig deeper in each one of those scenarios and go from there. I have a question in the chat. Are we going to see my insights about the PKO final table sims for part 3? Sure, yeah, that's a very good idea actually. I was wondering how to build part 3 of the webinar, but I think what lacks so far is some ICM PKO stuff, and the best example is PKO final table. So yeah, that's a very good point. They have a lot of PKO final table sims here as well. Can check it out. Look at that. That's like 20 sims for different final table scenarios. And yeah, as Pavel said, one of the best ways to improve in PKOs for free without losing money at the tables is by grinding these sims. It can be PKO regular stuff or PKO final tables, which is very nice and great idea. So what's also very interesting here, I just noticed, is they have a lot of different average stacks for these final tables. You can see this could be basically a turbo final table with 18 big blinds effective, not effective but average, and we have some more deeper stacked like 52 blinds average stack final table, which is nice. Wow, that's very cool. And you have a lot of stuff here. Really, maybe some of those can be hyper turbo, like the 18 effective here, average here. Will we discuss some post flop? We have a question. Yes, I really want to include some post flop scenarios for the next time, because this is the next part where the biggest adjustments come into play. Basically, the post flop is divided into as attacking stack. This is the big stack. He wants to make sure he gets to the bounty. He wants to reduce the SPR maximally. And then there is the defending stack who wants to accomplish exactly the opposite. He wants to play as small pot as possible. We see a lot of differences in terms of different c-bet frequencies and different sizes. Also, the river is very interesting because then we get to expand our value range a lot when we cover, because of the added chips for the villain bounty. Yeah, and then the shorter stack, he has to bluff catch way more because of this wider value range from villain. As you can imagine, in these scenarios, there are a lot of exploits possible. A lot of people, they don't adjust properly, and there is a lot of room to improve and to gain edges, which is very nice. Even nowadays, after so many years since the bounties have been on the market, I think they were introduced first by PokerStars in like 5 years ago, roughly. And still there is so much room to improve. And I would say the average player plays like 10 to maybe 15% optimal, which is crazy. So yep. Okay. If there are no more questions, I'll give it like 2 or 3 more minutes to see. Oh, thanks, man. I just had someone in the chat thanking for all this information and the presentation for these first 2 parts. Yeah, I'm glad I can help. I always it always makes me happy when I find some ways to improve myself in bounties, and it makes me also happier if I can help you guys improve in bounties. So yeah, you guys are welcome. And I think the most improvements should come from the last part, because it's going to be even more advanced, including some post flops and final tables in PKOs. So I'm looking forward for it. Make sure you come for it. It's gonna be next Friday, same time. All right. If there is nothing else, we'll call it a day and continue next week.